Morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. Hello, everyone, and good morning.
Good morning, Mike. Happy Tuesday.
It is a Tuesday. How are you doing, Tommy, these days?
You know what? I'm doing pretty good. Feel a little older. It's just another day. Did you ever listen to They Might Be Giants?
They Might Be Giants. Is this a podcast or is this a movie?
That was a band. I feel like that's right up your alley, too.
They Might Be Giants. I don't know. What genre is this fitting in?
I don't.
Oh, sorry about that. I had to something on the keyboard.
Not that genre.
Not that genre. Not that kind of music.
I guess it was kind of indie, but they were kind of humorous.
Okay.
Like, so if you ever watch Tiny Toons or Malcolm in the Middle, they're the ones who did the theme song to Malcolm in the Middle.
Yeah.
So, but one of their songs is "You're getting even older now, and now you're even older," and it's probably the best. No, anyways, I just feel older today.
Okay, so, let me write this name down, Tommy. So I'm gonna go listen to this, and then I can react to it later. What's the name of it again?
They Might Be Giants.
They Might Be Giants. Okay. Putting that down so I can figure out if I like it or not. Okay. Never heard of them. Not sure about the song, but I will check them out. I do like funny music. I actually, to be honest, most of my day is probably consuming music. I mean, I'm sitting on my computer. When I'm not on a call, I have some sort of music or something running in my ears. Is that what you do, Tommy? Do you listen to music throughout the day? Does that help you focus or not?
Talk radio, sports podcast, something that just doesn't matter, because if I like the song, then I get into it. What music do you listen to?
Everything. I listen to a lot of things. Most of my stuff is the EDM electronic dance music, preferably without any lyrics. I don't know how you can do any work with someone talking in the background and focus on anything. As soon as someone talks, my mind instantly goes towards thinking about what they're talking about, and I can't really focus.
So admittedly, incredibly easy.
Well, yeah, I can't do what you're doing. My brain does not work that way. Well, let me ask a question here. So let's get into our main topic today. Today, our main topic is source control inside BI. Is it necessary? Is it painful? Or is it a little bit of both? Maybe a bit of a rhetorical question there, but we'll kind of unpack this topic today. Also with this, we have some news. Recently, just yesterday, the announcement just came out. Microsoft Fabric is down in Atlanta. So we have the FabCon in Atlanta. We also now have a new conference showing up. The Microsoft SQL Community Conference is now also participating in Atlanta. We're going to have FabCon and SQLCon all in the same area. So this is a post that was made by Arun talking about this new conference. And I just want to throw that out there and let people know that there's a new conference coming to town, and we'll hope to see you there for both these things.
So it's the SQL Community Conference, not to be related with the SQL Pass or SQL Saturdays, right?
Oh, this is a Microsoft sponsored version of SQL. So this is SQL Server 2025 is what they're kind of talking about. It represents a fundamental shift in how they've been building SQL. It's a huge reimagining of what they're thinking SQL is doing with, vector search, AI model management, RAG patterns. All these other AI-based things are now being added into the SQL space. And so they're going to join up with the Fabric community and have a whole bunch of additional people there at another conference. So this will be interesting, Tommy. I have been to a conference in Atlanta a long time ago. There's a huge convention center right next to their stadium downtown. And yeah, easily you could have two conferences happening at the same time at this conference center. It's just massive. Also note here at the bottom of the article, there's a discount code. If you get early access registration through November 14th, and I'll put the code here in the chat window as well, you can get $200 off of your tickets if you register now sooner than later.
Dude, that's awesome. Do you think you'll be going?
Well, I'm going to FabCon, so that's happening.
Woo!
Whether or not they're going to let me wander over to the area that is SQLCon, I don't know. Again, we've never had a conference where it's kind of been two big conferences together. I'm not sure how they're doing them. Is it the same registration? Is it different? Not really sure how that's going to all play out. So interesting to see how that's going to work. Yeah, kind of interesting. Let's see how all these this new experience kind of plays out. I'm happy to have all the SQL people here. Tommy, do you use your SQL inside Fabric today currently?
Oh yeah, I do. The SQL database. I'm still upset that we can only do up to 3 databases all the time.
Is that Is that because, why is there a limit on that? Because the thing doesn't charge you when it's not running.
I do not know.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would think you'd be able to do more, especially. So I was one of the things when we first got this SQL database inside Fabric, I was trying to test it out and figure out why would you put this here? And I think over the course of last couple of months, as I've been building things, Tommy, I've been doing a lot more marketing in general. So in marketing experience, like I'm just trying to figure where to put the data, where to put my lists, my contact lists, all this information. The more I work with the marketing side of things, the more I'm disappointed with all the tools that are out there that do marketing related things. MailChimp, there's a lot of email services that are out there. They all seem to be like not really doing what I want. My workflow that I want doesn't really have, the tools out there today don't seem to fit my workflow very well. And so I'm trying to get my head around, like, how do I build this? What kind of workflow should I be producing? What tools can integrate together? And at the end of the day, I keep going back to whatever tool we stand up, doesn't matter what it is. Mm-hmm. I want all the data to come back to Fabric. I want it to be in somewhere. And so to me, when I look at like SQL, a SQL server, this makes a lot of sense to put the SQL server inside Fabric and then connect any applications or things you build back down to the SQL server, because now you have full SQL tables, a transactional database inside Fabric running as if you would have it in Azure or somewhere else. And it makes it really easy to mirror that data into a lakehouse. You can get all the other transactions. So it removes, I think, a lot of friction between the transactional side of things and then the operational side of things. I think it does come with some implications, but I'm kind of excited seeing the database world coming more into Fabric. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. What do you think, Tommy?
No, I completely agree. And I think when the SQL databases first came out, I know you were a little hesitant that we had lake houses, but
I was.
Yeah, but honestly,
and data warehouses for that matter. Like if you're doing SQL, I would say use a data warehouse. Like why would you need a SQL database? But I mean, sometimes you just need an app that runs on top of a database. Well, that fits very well for SQL.
No, and I think that's the biggest thing is it's the fact that, are there better ways from the analytical point of view to get your data through? Absolutely now. However, this database still has its place in terms from querying, from access for users. But again, to your point, from the application side of things, that alone makes it more than worthwhile.
Yeah, I like, and again, I think maybe my strongest point for like why you would want to consider bringing SQL into Fabric, I love the idea of how quickly it ties back to other Fabric related integration pieces. Like if I need mirroring, it's right there. It just works. Like there's a lot of things, there's a lot of features of it that make it easy for me to then do the reporting of the data as well as all the transactional side of data, which I really like.
1000%. Dude, I love it. And I'm so glad there's an entire conference just related to SQL. And I mean, there's SQL bits, and obviously those conferences they're more than just SQL, but the fact that SQL is still in the name kind of tells me everything I need to know.
We went to the SQL bits a while ago, Tommy, and I felt like it had some flavor of SQL to it, but I felt like SQL bits had moved a lot more towards a Fabric bent and mentality, a lot more around what Fabric is doing or Power BI is doing in SQL bits. It's interesting now seeing, I would kind of allude to Fabric conferences, a lot of Fabric related things, and now we're now adding back in the flavor of SQL back into everything. So anyways, just really interesting, good stuff. I'm excited to see the conference. I'll be interested to see how this is going to play out. Anyways, any other news or worthy items, Tommy? Do you have any beat from the streets you want to talk about?
No, I was trying to see if there's any news on the blogs, but nothing terribly new. So
yeah, this is the one I pulled this one from the Fabric blog on this one. So that's kind of why I pulled this one in. There was really nothing on the Power BI blog coming out there as well. All right. Well, that being said, let's get into our main topic today. We have another call in today. So another call in today. Welcome, Greg, as our call in for today. We're going to talk more about source control and kind of unpack things here. So let me give a quick little introduction here around some things that are source control. I'm sure this conversation will wander many different places. Source control inside Microsoft Power BI Fabric experiences. What do we get from source control? My background has been from day one of Power BI, the very beginning, And I remember at the very beginning, it was source control was shoving all your PBIX files into SharePoint and saving them somewhere. So you had a version of when Michael screwed up the report page and Tommy made an update on something, I could at least go back and find what changes I had previously. So the very simple form is like, where you back up things, where do you put things and move things? Since then, we now have a lot more interesting tools at our disposal. We now have a Git integration. We now have the PBIP format, which I think is a great enabler of breaking apart the file format of the semantic model and the report side now. So everything now seems to be able to be controlled into these smaller files, which I think adds a lot of capability to the source control story. Now Tommy can work on page 1, I can work on page 2, Greg can work in the semantic model, and everyone can get their changes brought together into a single object that we can publish to the service, which is kind of interesting. So I'll just pause right there. Greg, welcome. What are your thoughts on the initial concept here around source control?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a longtime listener and third-time caller. I'm really happy to join you guys here. I think source control opens the door to a lot of other conversations, things that people think about when they think about source control, but that aren't actually source control. So to me, source control is any system that you use to manage multiple different versions of the source code for some project that you're working on, some software, some report, some model, where you keep the thing that defines those things that you're working on. Mm-hmm. And it's different than other conversations, but associated with it. Like you mentioned, SharePoint.
Like the early days.
Yeah. Or OneDrive would do the same, where you could keep a version history.
Yeah.
And I think there's a crossover there, but a version history is a little bit different than source control, because a version history really only lets you have a linear set of changes. You have version 1, then comes version 2, then comes version 3, and you need to make sure that you put things in there in order. Whereas I think source control, a system to manage multiple versions, doesn't need to restrict you to just that linear history. And so I think the thing that makes the big difference, and when we're talking about source control and not just backups and not just history, is the ability to manage concurrent development. And so I think concurrency is something that's really important to talk about. And concurrency doesn't necessarily mean that you've got multiple people. You can be concurrent with yourself very easily. Concurrency simply means that you have interleaved processes of development. And so to be concurrent with yourself, you might be working on a feature, and then in the middle of it, like you're halfway through writing the code for it, someone finds a bug in production, and you need to pause your work on that feature development, even though you're halfway done. You need to go and you need to fix the bug in production to get the model refreshing again. And that might require some changes in order to fix whatever bug has arisen. And so immediately at that point, even though you're one person, you've got a feature in flight that you've stopped, you're not done with, but you've done some work. That's one version. You've got the version in production, and then you've got the version that you need to edit based on what's in production to fix whatever bug has arisen. Then you push the change to fix the bug. Now you've got a different version in production than where you started from when you started on your feature. But you go back to your feature and you finish the work on that. And then you want to get that into production as well. And so concurrent development, I think, is really what we need to think about when we're thinking about source control. And then we want to talk about the things that are necessary to support that concurrent development, some of the implications of it, and also tooling that goes along with and helps it.
I like the term you're using there, concurrent development. I think, and again, I'm looking at this lens of like, how did I learn about this stuff? Like I kind of started from the Power BI world back in the early days, and I didn't think about anything concurrently, right? I mean, part of being able to do concurrent development depends on, can I build small pieces of a single larger project, right? So I think there's a dependency there that we didn't really have in the very beginning. It was very difficult for us to take a single Power BI file, PBX file, and divide it across a team. Also, Greg, I think to your point here, the concurrent development makes a lot of sense when we start talking about a team of people working together on things. I like your example there, I think, of fixing something in production while having a new report feature or semantic model feature in flight is a great example of when you need to go make some changes to some source code, push them out, fix things, and then take your feature branch or the things that you're building that's different or new, absorb those changes into your feature branch and then continue on developing. So I think this problem gets very much exacerbated when you have multiple developers trying to work in a team. If you're just one person, okay, you can kind of manage it. Like you can kind of get around it a little bit. I agree, concurrency with yourself is a solid point. But I don't know, like if we're coming from the Power BI world and bringing them to Fabric now, I don't think there's a lot of initial Power BI developers thinking about how could I concurrently develop stuff. Like this is this is like a very software development experience that's being brought to a less, I would say less technical, less, it's less, everything has been kind of like easy buttons, right? The whole goal with Fabric and things has been, it's a UI, it's a GUI, it's something simple there. And now you're bringing this really technical software development technique into Power BI, which I think is appropriate, especially on larger teams or when things get bigger. I agree with this, but I think it's we have to start educating more in this space and kind of preaching the reasons it's not scary. You can do it. And there's a lot of value added from this idea here. Tommy, you had something to say.
So this is all only dependent on the fact that we actually have Tyndall now, right? Because even though before we did have the model.bim file and there are some things you could do in Tableau Editor, source control was not really a production or a preferred way to really even manage Power BI content and artifacts before. You kind of could have, but it really didn't make sense. And tell me if I'm wrong about that.
I don't think you're wrong, Tommy. I would just maybe extend your definition slightly from my perspective, right? So before Microsoft gave us the capability to use Tyndall, which is the semantic model, easy to humanly read version of this. And then there's the PBIP format or the PBIR format. The PBIR format is like the same thing, but just for the report side, right? So, taking a single PBIX file and dividing it into like, okay, let's talk about the definition of this page. Let's talk about the definition of this visual. When you break those things down into individual files, that's where the strength of this source control and concurrent development makes a lot of sense, I think. And to be very clear, the first time I ever saw this was Tabular Editor. Tabular Editor 2 was the very first time I saw anything of this nature. Now, it wasn't Tyndall at the time. It was all still just JSON. But Tabular Editor 2, when I saw it, would open up a PBX file, or you could connect to the semantic model. You could serialize. You could basically save to files or save to folder the entire model. And then the whole model would be broken down into, here's the measures, here's a table, here's the other properties of the model. Everything was broken down into smaller files. And then I could, and the trick of this was, yes, once you take a semantic model and break it down to small files, okay, cool. But you have to put them back together and then put it back into the Power BI report to make sure that it could all be read and rebuilt again. So my first experience with, the source control stuff and seeing things serialized out and back in was Tabular Editor 2.
So I think there are a couple of things that have come up there that I'd like to respond to. The first is on the idea of source control as a new concept for a lot of people coming into Power BI and coming into Fabric. And I don't think the concept is new. I think some of the terminology that we use from a software engineering and development perspective, the terminology itself is new. I think some of the tools are definitely new. Git is not something that most people use with Word or Excel, but the idea is very common. And I think everyone is very familiar with seeing copies of documents float around. This is the final report.
Final two.
Underscore final underscore really this time. And so people are everyone, I think, that has worked in any sort of organization and had to deal with a document of any sort or an artifact of any sort, and also other people, is familiar with underscore final, double underscore really final, and that sort of thing, which is, at the end of the day, that naming convention for files is a system to manage versions of a thing. So it is source control. It's rudimentary. It's not often called source control. So the terminology is new, but the idea of I have different versions of this thing and I want to be able to look at both of them and see what changed, or I want to be able to go back to an older version and I might want to be able to pick and choose from multiple different edits. I think that's a very familiar experience. So it's just about educating on on techniques, tools, and jargon, but not necessarily on the idea itself of source control.
Yeah, I like that.
The second thing both of you brought up was, back in the older days of just a PBIX file, and that's the only kind of file we had in Power BI. That does make source control very, very hard for a couple of reasons. One is that the PBIX was opaque. It was a binary file, so you couldn't open it up in a text editor and actually see what had changed in any meaningful way. You could unzip it and then poke around inside, but that wasn't supported, and there was not really a lot of good tooling for doing something like that. Then the other side of it is the idea of a monolithic file, which is different from an opaque file. So the PBIX was opaque. You couldn't look at it and see what was in it. You had to open it in Power BI Desktop. But a monolithic file is something like the model.bim, where you have one file that represents a whole lot of different things, one big file. And so one of the things that we get in a source control system is the ability to show multiple different versions and to perform a diff operation. And a diff is an action that you take to see the differences, to highlight just those things that differ between two different versions that are in the source control system. If you were using, underscore final and underscore double final, then the way that you would diff is with your old eyeballs, and you would just look at the two of them and try to find the differences. If you're using a tool like
almost
Git,
impossible.
Yeah. If you're using a tool like Git, you've got the command git diff, which does this action for you and shows you just those parts that are different. And you can also get summary statistics out of it. So you can say which files have differences, or how many changes are there between two versions and two files, or how many changes are there between many files in these two different versions. But if you have a single file, if you have a monolithic file like model.bim or like the PBIX file, then your history of changes just says something changed in this file. And then the next change is something changed in the same file. And your next edit is something changed in that very same file again. So if you look at the history of changes, the file names don't tell you anything. And that becomes a little bit problematic. And this is where Timdal is useful. This is where the save to folder feature that's used by Tabular Editor and also some other community tools like PBI tools is very useful. What it does is it starts to break apart that monolith into multiple different pieces. And as soon as you have multiple different files, then your source control system is tracking files. It's always tracking files. But if you have many files, then you see more granular changes. And so with Timdal, you end up with a file per table. And so you can edit one table and Tommy can edit another table and I can edit a third. And then we'll see Mike edited table 1. Tommy edited the customers table and Greg edited the sales table. So we've got 3 different things that have changed, but we don't know what we changed in them. Mike, you might have been editing measures that belong to the measures table, and Tommy could have been editing customer details that are in the customers table. So he could have been adding columns or changing columns and column names, and I could have been editing partitions in the sales table. All of those are things that are changes to the table, but they're very, very different changes. And if the file that you have is per table, there's nothing at the source control layer to tell you who was doing what. And that's where this is chronologically out of order, but in terms of the ideas, this is going one step further. The save to folder feature that's in Tabular Editor and used by PBI tools takes you down to a file per object. And so a column is an object, a measure is an object, a relationship can be its own object or could be part of the table, depending on how you want to serialize these things. But then you were in the measures table and you were editing measures. If you have a file per measure, we'll see that Mike edited not just the measures table, but he edited measure 1 and measure 2, but not measure 3. And then we see that Tommy was editing the customers table, and we see that he was editing things that are in the columns folder, and he was editing a thing named customer name, and customer name went away, but customer first name appeared and customer last name appeared. And so you can see just at the level of the files, that Tommy was making those changes to some columns. And then you look at the changes I'm making to partitions, and you see that there's a folder for partitions, and you see that the partition definitions are changing. Maybe I'm updating the incremental refresh policy, or I'm changing the time periods that we use, going from a partition per quarter to a partition per month. And you'd be able to see at the level of the files that Mike was changing files that lived in the measures folder. Tommy was changing files that lived in the columns folder, and Greg was changing files that live in the partitions folder. And the more granular your files are, the more information the source control system can tell you, because source control systems are agnostic to what is in the files. They are just saying, there's a version of this file, and here's a different version of the file. And they give you tools to work with that. But for the most part, the information that you get out of source control systems is about changes to files. And so that granularity is also very, very useful in being able to work with these things and understand in terms that the source control system can deal with, to understand what those changes are.
All right. I was taking copious notes while we're talking through all those pieces here. So, one of the things, I think two pieces, I think Tommy, you touched on this one as well. And I'm going to want to just kind of reiterate this again. I think the main unlock for us here has been the PBIX file that we have been using since the beginning has now been changed into a format that is now easier to leverage and use. And the fact that things were tools were able to open that file up, unzip it, serialize things, take them apart basically, and stitch them back together. And you were able to do that kind of in an unsanctioned way. So you could do it, but Microsoft would basically say, look, if something fails and it's just totally broken after you do this, not our responsibility. We're not supporting it. I think for me, the big moment or shift around working with Power BI and Fabric is now that experience has shifted. Microsoft now says, look, we are going to update our formats of underneath what's inside the PBIX. And we will now start supporting small files of definition of objects. And to me, that was like the unlock moment where everything in my world is like, yeah, this is changing. Like this is next level stuff. This is where we should have been at the very beginning, day one, but it was definitely a opportunity of they're just trying to get out the door. It was just getting built to get done and get people adopting the tool and moving quickly and fast and iterate quickly. There wasn't this whole thinking of, well, let's build this new online visualization tool called Power BI and let's think about how everyone will edit page one versus page. It wasn't really well thought out, I think, in the beginning. Well, it was, but it wasn't designed for like developers to co-edit files and things. So what we've seen though is a growing up effect or a maturing of the solution that I'm really happy with now, which is really the unlock here. So that was kind of like my one point. Then I want to make one other side point that you're talking about, Greg. While I think in principle, it's easy to understand many people working on different things inside an object, a report, a semantic model. One of the things I feel like that gets people tripped up very quickly in this is when, Greg, you're editing partitions and Tommy also goes in and edits partitions. And we have these things called the merge conflict. Like when two people edit the same file, and again, it makes a lot of logical sense if you just think about it, right? If everything inside your PBIX file is broken down into small, tiny files, right? Again, I go back to the analogy of like page one, right? So if we're on page one and Tommy edits page one, but Greg, you edit page two, no issue. Like we know that there's separate files, two things that have been modified differently and not an issue. But if you're both editing page one, right? If you're both redefining things on the same object, and again, I'm kind of paintbrushing or spreading a very weird analogy here because we can get a little bit more detailed than that too. But if you're both editing the same thing, okay, how do you know which change wins? And I think this is outside of that, that's the first part where most new users get tripped up is how do we handle this idea of what is a merge conflict? How do we resolve this? What are good ways of using the tools that we're given? Get the tooling that exists, diffs and things, to understand which one should we change. And most often new users just say, I can't figure out. I'll just delete all my changes, start over, and then make my changes again. So I don't necessarily think that's the best option. But as I think about this, that's where I see the first point of friction in this space as I observe it. Your thoughts, Tommy?
And I think the biggest thing here too is we only have Tyndall, and as I'm looking at this,
well, hold on,
Greg. Yeah.
What do you mean we only have Tyndall?
Well, right. Okay, you're right. Back up from a semantic model point of view, we have
now I understand. Okay, I'm with you.
Because obviously, and honestly, most of the conversation, Mike, that we've had around Git has really been around Tyndall. It has not been around the other Fabric artifacts that, even though they produce files and not binary, data flows, notebooks, they all produce files.
Oh, you're going there. Okay.
But, I mean, it's true though. We don't talk about that at all, because there's really not, those are not ones that, I mean, even the notebook format, the way they have it is not just a IPYNB like notebook file format. It has a whole other context to it. Lake Houses as well has files that it produces source control data flows too, but we're not touching those. And really, Tyndall's the only one that's actually meant for, I mean, to make it an equivalent like a Python package or Node, where it's kind of like, okay, I can see all the different things that were done. It's almost like creating a website. Compared to the other formats right now, we're not really touching.
Interesting you bringing that up.
And I don't, to be honest, I don't find that to be a problem. I don't think that's an issue that we have. So, but it is something to consider as well when we're going to see we do the full stack Git. Right now, we're just saying that we're completely experienced from the Tyndall point of view.
What are your thoughts, Greg, on so again, I was focusing a lot of my conversation around, Greg, on the Power BI report and the semantic model side. Tommy, you bring up the whole everything in Fabric side as well. My initial opinion here is it's interesting that you're bringing up the rest of Fabric, Tommy, because yes, everything else, pipelines, other things are all defined by JSON behind the scenes, which again is a series of small files that can be edited or modified for definitions of things. What are your thoughts on this part, Greg? Like this, I think this is, sorry, let me, one thought, and then I'll kick it to you, Greg. I feel like, Tommy, the difference here is a lot of the other experiences that we're getting are cloud created. It's in the browser.
Oh yeah. Right.
So for me, the big difference is like, I don't get a tool to build a data pipeline on my local machine. So to some degree, I feel it's a bit simpler for Microsoft to come up with schemas and repeatable patterns. And also, a lot of these other tools come from traditional Azure things that already have this whole rich history of deploying, building, a web browser to get stuff, ARM templates to deploy stuff. So all of that has to be defined in a way that can be easily deployed and updated as you go. And so all the other Fabric items make sense to me that they're kind of already supporting versions or version source control of those items. All right, that's all I want to say. Sorry, Greg, over to you.
So I'll start with a somewhat minor point in what you said was the ability to run things locally, which I think is absolutely critical to be able to develop things and use source control well. If you have to go somewhere else and make the changes, and then the canonical source is not what you have, but living somewhere else, and then you get copies of it, most of the workflows that are built around source control and any sort of downstream things like CI/CD don't really fit in that sort of paradigm. So being able to develop locally, I think, is absolutely critical. But on the broader question of being able to, you were talking about being able to merge changes from different people's work. And I think that's where, again, the serialization formats become very important. And so when we're talking about this, I think it's, again, important to make sure we're talking about the same things. So merging is the action that you want to take when you have two different versions and you want to bring those together. And those versions may have conflicting changes where two people edited the same file, or they may not have conflicting changes where all of the changes are two different files. And this is a somewhat naive look at it, but it's what is available to the source control system, because Git doesn't know what a tabular model is. Git doesn't know what Python code is. Git doesn't know what C# code is or what JSON is. Git knows about files, and it knows about what lines are in a file, and that's it. And so Git is able to do actually a lot with that very rudimentary knowledge. It can merge changes to different parts of a file, and it does a pretty good job of figuring out if you and I edited significantly different sections of the file and there aren't too many changes. It can usually make a merge even within a single file pretty effectively. But it's up to a bunch of heuristics. And again, it's without understanding of what that file is. And so the more files that we can break something apart into, the lower the surface area for a merge conflict is. Because again, we can only have a merge conflict when multiple people touch the same file or multiple different branches have edited the same file. And so the more files you have to represent smaller things, the less surface area there is for a merge conflict. And so in that way, the best thing that you can do is to have the smallest possible representation, the most files to represent the things, because that means every change that you make is going to be in different places. And so that's where the strength of Timdal is over the model.bim, because Timdal has more files, so more surface area to make changes in different places. And saving to folder, again, gives you even more surface area. And you'd have to be changing the same measure or the very same column to end up with a merge conflict. And so there are a couple of different things that we want to optimize for, because what happens when you get a merge conflict is you need to remediate it. You need to go in and change and say, in this file, we want these lines from the first person and these lines from the second person. And when you need to do that, you need to be able to edit the files by hand, because what Git does when you're making those, when you get a merge conflict, Git inserts information into the file that basically makes it invalid. It'll insert a bunch of angle brackets. It'll tell you which branches two different sections came from, and that's invalid Timdal. That's invalid JSON. But it's just Git showing these lines were different. Here's where the conflict is. Human, go figure it out. And so there are a couple of things that you need to do there. You need to be able to read that conflict and decide which pieces that you want. And you need to be able to make sure that after resolving the conflict, you have a valid file. And so Timdal is really optimizing for being able to read that merge conflict and being able to edit that thing by hand. It is friendlier to the human eye than JSON is. But save to folder is optimizing in a different direction. Save to folder, by being so granular, virtually eliminates merge conflicts, because it's a very rare scenario where you would actually assign to two different people the same measure to edit. Like, you wouldn't give two tasks for the same measure at the same time, or two tasks for the same column at the same time. So
you shouldn't. That's not good practice there.
Yeah. So saving to folder almost eliminates merge conflicts, so you never even have to look at it. Timdal makes it easier to deal with the merge conflict when it happens, but by not going as far, because right now Timdal only supports going down to a file per table. Doesn't support going down to a file per object. If Timdal did that, then you'd get the best of both worlds. You would have this very granular serialization that basically gets rid of merge conflicts. And on those super rare occasions where you get them, it would be friendlier to look at. But for me, and this is personal preference, and it's not right or wrong to prefer something different, but for me, being able to nearly eliminate merge conflicts is more important than making them readable when they happen.
So this is where I kind of put my idea or thinking cap on here. And this is where does this make sense to have AIs and agents participating in some of these challenges that we have around merging of things? Is this where, like, if I'm looking at a diff between two files, yes, I can go see the exact diff of what's going on there, right? Is this, I haven't seen, in my opinion, I haven't seen anything yet. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just I haven't experienced it yet. But is this something where, agents or agentic things would be really well served? It's all code. I can see what it was, what it's now doing. I don't really want to be that technical expert figuring out how to merge or what's the best choice here to merge things. What if we could throw some AI at some of this? Is this something, Greg, that we could throw something AI at it and it would solve some of these problems for newer users? Or do you think that's just like a misnomer or a fallacy? It's not a good idea to do that.
Well, the first thing I'll say is that AI isn't pixie dust, and you can't just sprinkle it onto something and expect.
Of course it is. I just throw it everywhere. I mean, you're not handsome enough.
I tripped on some earlier this morning.
You're not handsome enough. Just throw some AI on it. Yeah, it's good. You'll be much better. You're too tired today. Just add AI. You'll be not tired anymore. You run out of coffee. Throw AI at it. It'll figure it out. Like,
Who needs
Anything you
instant
want.
coffee when you have powdered AI, right?
You're
So-
right. It is like pixie dust. It's not a solution for everything, but as far as what do you think?
Yeah. That said, if you have an agent that you work with that you've taught about and you've given context to about the serialization formats at play, what a
Sure.
valid model looks like,
Okay.
then yeah, there's plenty of Git merge and Git command information in the training history of these models. For better or worse, Git has a somewhat confusing command line interface. So there are many questions on resources like Stack Overflow and elsewhere on other forums throughout the internet. So many people have asked questions and gotten, very pedantic step-by-step answers, and that's ideal training data. So the AIs are actually pretty decent at Git commands and stuff like that, and they know they've been trained on what a Git merge conflict marker looks like. So they can interpret that pretty well, but they can interpret the merge conflict information much better than they can interpret the TIMDL information, because TIMDL basically isn't in any of the training data.
Yes, correct.
And so getting good TIMDL out of an AI requires some prep work, but the AI LLMs should be quite good at the Git side of those things. And so if you've got an agent and you've got skills or tools or whichever name for that sort of concept is, where you've given context for specific actions to the AI, if you've already got that to work with Power BI models or semantic models in general, then an AI should probably be able to help with the merging quite well. But there is that prep work. And if you just sprinkle the AI on top, it'll tell you exactly what to do about the Git changes. And, it may or may not give you a valid model at the end of it.
Yeah, that's a problem especially with the AI. Even if you use something like Cursor or VS Code that actually has code review, heck, even right now with GitHub, you can actually have Copilot review your project before you do any pull requests. However, there's a lot of context you need to give it. You can do custom instructions, but it can't just be to AI, TIMDL is very, very new. And also it's one thing to see whether it's working or not, but the thing is, again, TIMDL is the semantic model side, which is, measures, formula, syntaxes. There's best practices that we could put in that AI is not going to do. So I'm going to make sure nothing's broken. And then there's the report side of the PBIR, making sure things are aligned, that it's also probably not going to do as well, which is kind of what you needed to do. Usually that code review is there if it's like, hey, I'm missing app script in some, development code. So that's one of the things we really want to watch out for as well.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the interplay there with the PBIR and other things is actually somewhere that I think an AI with proper context and skills and tools actually could be quite helpful with, because one of the limitations that I alluded to earlier is that Git is dealing at the level of files. And so having a clean merge is one thing. If Tommy's working on the customer table, like I said, and he's changing from a single customer name field to a customer first name and a customer last name field, and I'm working on a measure in a different table, TIMDL or save to folder, both of those, since we're in different tables, will have a clean merge. The merge will succeed. Git will allow you to finish. A clean merge is necessary, but not sufficient to give you a valid model at the end of it. So let's say that the measure that I was working on.
Okay, that's where I'm going to go. So you got to tie back the two columns from the one column. Yeah, go ahead. Keep going. I like this.
The measure. So let's say that the measure I'm working on, and remember, Tommy changed from customer name to two columns: customer first name and customer last name. And the measure I was working on was a distinct count of customer names. Well, my distinct count of customer name might be referencing the old single name column.
Yes.
And the correct way to do that distinct count now requires a summarize or a group by and a count rows of that, rather than a distinct count of a single column. So the model has changed in a way that cleanly merges, but still does not yield a valid model. And so you still have to have testing. You still have to have validation as part of your process, whether you're using source control or not. You should test and validate in some way. And one of my favorite observations is everyone has a test environment, whether they admit that or not. Just some people are lucky enough to also have a separate environment to have production in.
So
but some people, if you're testing and validating in production, that's fine, but production is your test environment. And you need to make sure that
doesn't break.
your changes are valid.
Yeah.
And Git is going to do nothing for you there, because
No.
Git does not know what a model is.
Correct. So here's where I want to. So we've talked a lot about a lot of like technical pieces around like merging and like all these different terms. So where do I want to kind of take the lens here just slightly and say, where do we suggest new users start? How do you get going with this? Like, so, okay, let's say conceptually, someone listening to the podcast is like, yeah, I'm on board. Like, this makes sense. I hear what you're saying. I understand the concept of small files, track things. I'm bought in. PBIR sounds great. Let's do it. So your team or you individually, how do you start learning to become good at this? How do you start incorporating this into your workflow? And so maybe I could just ask, it's just a general question, both of Tommy and Greg. Do you remember when you started working with Git? And Greg, you'll have to put your big thinking cap on this one. This is probably like a long time ago for you, but mine's probably not as long ago. But if you put your thinking cap on, what was it like for you to start understanding and learning Git, branching, rebasing, merges, all these terms we're saying here? What was it like when you started figuring it out? I'm gonna kick it here to Tommy first, and then maybe we'll hop over to Greg next. Yeah. Tommy, what was it like when you first learned it?
So it was weird, and I really wasn't doing my own projects with Git. I was mostly kind of looking at GitHub repos and testing them out. So like cloning them. Mm-hmm. So learning some basics of just what's in a repo. Okay, this got this, because for example, there's a lot of repos for like, hey, awesome rules or docs, or here's some custom commands, and I wanted to reference it. Yeah. Sooner or later, then actually, Mike, when you recommended to me to put my contracts in Markdown, well, it made a lot of sense to put that in a Git repo, so then I can kind of view it anywhere. So that was the first time that I actually started getting used to like, okay, I'm going to commit something now. Okay, what was the previous thing? Where's that file? And then it got obviously more when it came to Power BI and working on other projects where it was doing everything in main. Then I accidentally did something, so I right clicked on something and said just revert it, but it doesn't actually revert a commit, and then all the things, and then you actually can't commit something, and then you get very frustrated. So yeah, I went through all that until really realizing like, okay, if I'm going to any change I have to make, it's going to go into the branch. You can just having that process, but it took time to make some mistakes and then do some reading. But also just looking at a lot of other Git repos and, like I said, seeing what they're doing.
Okay. Love the points there, Tommy. I can echo a lot of the same sentiment that I was doing. The way you're experiencing it was how I was a lot. I'm going to GitHub. I'm pulling down a copy of some code, and I'm only building on main. That was what I was doing. Not good. That's kind of how I started. I also found it very difficult to understand the branching and which things were happening where. So one of my first interactions with like Git in general, I started a lot with the GitHub desktop application. It simplifies things a little bit for me. I wasn't very good at the command line, and I would say I'm okay at it right now. My developers are way better than command line than I am. They're like whipping up commands and like, oh, I'll just type all these things out and just use it on the command line. Great. I wish I was spending more time on it. I'm doing a lot more architecting and bigger picture things. So when I started doing Git, that was kind of like the first entry into it. Oh, I can store all these little projects down on my computer. I can use Git desktop to help me manage those things. I could, with a UI, I could, create and click buttons, make branches, all these different things directly in there. I'm now much more of a fan of VS Code. I think I don't really actually use GitHub desktop at all anymore. I've almost exclusively inside VS Code doing everything there. And again, I'm still not the best at command line. I'm sure Greg is much more on the command line thing. So I like your sentiment there, Tommy. Let's kick over to Greg. Greg, what was it like for you to start learning this stuff? And maybe some recommendations for new users. How did they get started?
So I really like official documentation, and there actually is a link that I had shared with you. It's probably a good time to drop into the chat, the Git SCM one, which is about branching and merging. And I find that the Git documents are quite good, but they're the sort of documentation that aren't the best to get started.
Yes.
They're really good to firm up an understanding after you've built up an intuition somewhere else. I don't remember which tutorials I used, but I remember the metaphor that was very helpful for me. And what I would suggest people do is, as they're working on getting familiar with Git and they're making a branch, or they're doing a diff between two different branches and that sort of thing, I would really recommend paralleling that by opening up a different folder in your file explorer and making a whole copy of the folder that contains the stuff that is in the Git repo. Make a second copy of that whole folder and name that the same as you would the branch. And think of branches in source control as just whole copies of the root folder of where your repo lives. And if you're going to make 3 branches, that means you make 3 different copies of that source repo. And then when you want to understand what it means to merge things or to diff across branches, go through your Git tutorial and do that. Do those operations in the Git tutorial to look at, diffing between branches or doing a merge between branches. But then also go and look at the difference between those 2 folders that you've made, where you have the original folder and then you have the copy of everything in that in a second folder named the same as you would the branch. And just think about it as, okay, I've got these 2 copies of the folders and I want to make them one. I want to take everything that I did in this copy and bring that into the original one. And that metaphor of thinking of copies of folders and subdirectories on the file system is really useful for me in thinking about Git. It's not a perfect analogy, but I find it's much more helpful than trying to start off by understanding branches as their own thing. But just think of them as copies of the folder. And that metaphor was very helpful for me.
Good. So I've put the link to the documentation here. I also put the little meme here, which I think is also very funny. Greg, you threw down a quick little XKCD. It's like a little meme website that does these little memes for technical people here. And I think that the meme here is quite hilarious. It's a little image here of some people pointing at a computer, little stick figures, and it says, one person says, "This is Git. It tracks collaborative work. It on projects through a beautiful distributed graph tree model." And the other individual on the slide goes, "Cool. How do we use it? No idea. Just memorize these shell commands and then type them to sync up." That's like, that was 100% like my first interaction with, I don't really know what they do. If I type this command, the merge conflict goes away and I'm happy again. Like, that's the kind of stuff I was initially doing here. And one thing I just want to kind of, as I think about this and what your comments there, Greg, we're talking about source control and we're talking about Git or GitHub or how that integration is working here. I've done a lot of talking with DevOps and what that is in conjunction with what source control is. Source control is a strategy. It's a technique that you're using to be able to have people collaboratively work on things. When we talk like DevOps, it's a broader story, but people think DevOps is like a program, Azure DevOps. That's not what it is. I mean, DevOps is a process. It's a business-enabled process to help you get work done. So I see source control as being like, if we think about Lego bricks here, source control and using Git is kind of like a part of this foundation. It's part of the ecosystem that is what we call DevOps, development operations, and it defines the process by which we need to do to get work done. And so this is like one of those foundational bricks that you have to understand to help you move forward. And I think I'm very pleased to see Microsoft improving this area. There's definitely improvements coming. It's still not perfect. There's still a lot of challenges with using source control with files, semantic models, and all the things that come from Fabric. But if nothing else, this is like a good starting point to start figuring out, like, where does this surface area fit? Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I think without going into another hour or two on DevOps as a practice, it's important to understand that DevOps, like you said, it is a series of practices and also automations that go on top of other things. So it's
I'd agree with that one.
Almost all DevOps is built on top of some source control system, and usually on top of a source control forge is the generic term. So GitHub is a forge. GitLab is a different forge. Azure DevOps from Microsoft is a different forge. And so forges are these things where you have the source code and also the automations on top of it. And I don't know of much DevOps that isn't built on top of source control. But the important thing is that the things like CI/CD, these are just event-driven automations. The event is that some new code comes in.
Sure.
And the automations are the CI/CD part. The fact that they're implemented on top of source control is a happy coincidence, but they are different things to understand. And I think it's useful to draw these sorts of lines because it can feel really overwhelming. If you think source control is everything that you can do on GitHub, then source control seems even bigger and more imposing because everything that you can do on GitHub as a category is a lot. And it's a lot more than source control. It's also project management. It's also automated builds and automated deployments. Sure. And all of these things are good practices, but you can start adopting source control without having to adopt everything else, or at least not right now. And having a good source control practice is useful for all of those other things as well. A good source control practice goes very well with a good project management practice, but you don't need to adopt both at once. A good source control discipline goes very well with automated builds. But again, you don't have to do both of those at once.
I want to throw out an opinion here that may or may not land well as we kind of wrap up here. I guess we're going to kind of start wrapping here. But when we think about Git, CI/CD, changes on things, when I look at the landscape that is Fabric right now, right, or anything that's premium capacity, by default, premium capacity gives you the ability to use Git on a workspace. Now, there's some places where this stuff falls apart. But again, as we're talking about like new users getting involved with Git and building things and at least tracking source control on top of their workspaces, what are your feelings on like I want to say it's like entry level and then there's like professional level of things, right? So if I'm entry level, I'm probably thinking about turning a Git, a source control on at a workspace level. And then next level up would be, okay, now that you've source controlled the workspace, you can then also go see it on Azure DevOps or GitHub and see what's being created when you change items or elements on the workspace. That's level 2 maybe. But level 3 is, okay, you now know what you're doing. And to your point, Greg, around the forges, right, where actions can happen. When you get to like that next level, you don't necessarily need to link the workspace anymore to the Git repo, and you can just manage all of the code independently, and then the forge can push the code into the workspace as you need. So my opinion here is I think the synchronizing a workspace using the Git integration is a good first step for newer users. It kind of starts some good initial principles. It doesn't solve all the problems. I mean, it kind of is acting like you're only building on main all the time. It's not good for that reason. So I definitely will acknowledge some of it falls apart, right? This doesn't 100% fit the story of what we've been talking here today. But I do think it's like level 1. And then level 2, you can kind of level up a bit more by seeing what's in Git and GitHub, pulling those files down locally, making changes, pushing it back up. And then for me, when you add source control to a workspace, you start shifting where the true definition of things live. They stop becoming the workspace. And I can't tell you the number of organizations I've worked with where people will just upload PBX files and say, okay, well, they're there. And they'll just delete them off their desktop. And then, a month or two later, come back and just have to download them again, which is, again, it works. I've got me in the past when things were not as robust. I've gotten burned doing that. I've gotten burned where I put stuff up, things got edited, and I got locked in the service and I can't get it out. And it becomes very difficult to get copies of that stuff back out of the service. With the advent of better CI/CD pipelines and things, I think Microsoft's gotten a lot better at letting you getting things out of the service. So that's gotten immensely better. Not perfect, but better. So I'm just going to pause right there. I said a lot of things, the progression, step 1 to more pro level things. Let me kick it over to Tommy. Tommy, do you agree with that kind of approach? Or do you have vehement, disagreement with like how I'm pitching this?
Honestly, I would say that this is something you got to start in dev rather than just turning a few things on, because this can break a work. I mean, I've already broken a workspace before. So if you don't have the plan with the branching strategies with different workspaces and you're just going to do everything in main, you can easily run into issues, not just with trying to do a commit, but I've had issues with the PBIR file saying it didn't have enough refreshes and no idea what that meant. But so I would say, yeah. So I would say, no, this is absolutely something that you need to start in dev and just have a playground to do.
Greg, what are your thoughts?
I'd echo Tommy a little bit, but I also do agree with you. I think it is better to have source control turned on for a workspace than not. If you're starting from absolutely zero, nothing else, better to turn it on than not. But I agree with Tommy. And the way that I would state it is this: sync is neither a build action nor is it a deploy action. So git sync is not those things, but people try to use it for those things. I don't think we have time to really dive into building and deploying, but I'll give a quick example. One thing that's very common to do, not so much in the Power BI and semantic model world, but I think it's a good practice people should use. But one thing that's very common is to put into a built artifact the exact commit hash. And a hash is what Git uses to identify a single commit. It uniquely identifies that set of changes throughout the entire repository. And a common thing to do is to put that Git hash into the built artifact. For a semantic model, that would mean defining a measure or a table with a hard-coded column that has the Git hash in it. Now, the only possible way to do that is to make a change to what is in the source control repository after something has been checked in. It is impossible to put the hash into something and then commit it, because by changing the hash, you've changed the object. You commit it, there's a new hash. So you can't actually take the hash and put it into the object within the context of a Git commit. You can only do that outside of that context through some sort of automated build action. This is one example, and it is representative of the types of things that you might want to do. You want to act on what is checked into source control, and then build something, and then take that built object and put it into place in an appropriate environment, in dev, in test, in prod. To be able to do something like that, sync is an insufficient mechanism. And so sync is not build, sync is not deploy. And if you want to do CI/CD, you want to be able to build automatically, you want to be able to deploy automatically. And so that's where I'm going to echo what Tommy said. If you're trying to use Git sync as part of a DevOps practice, you're probably going to run into some pains.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you, Mike. It's better to turn it on than not if you're doing nothing else. But as soon as you're trying to adopt other practices, you should probably turn off Git sync and just treat your repo in your Forge as your source of truth. And then it is responsibility and work, because you have to then come up with the deployment process that takes bits that live in source control and take them and put them into the place where they need to go. Sync does move bits from one place to another. It takes the exact bits on disk from one place and puts them in the other. But that is, again, neither build nor deploy. It is simply sync.
Okay, good points there. I think we have a whole nother topic we could basically open up here is like deployment patterns and how does that look, and where do you start? So really good thoughts here. I hope everyone has enjoyed this conversation around source control, things that are out there, just some really fundamentals. I think a lot of this really wasn't a very detailed conversation around specifically Fabric or Power BI. It was more just conceptually, what does this mean for us? How do we mentally put a mental model around what source control means for us now that we're inside this Fabric world? Anyways, Greg, thank you so much for your time on the podcast today. Again, as always, I love the education you're providing to us. It's good to have someone way smarter than both Tommy and I put together on the podcast. So thoroughly enjoy the conversation and the examples you're bringing. Spot on. Super, super clean. I really like the examples as well. That being said, thank you all so much for joining us on the podcast. We appreciate your time. We know you could be doing a million other things, like actually getting real work done at your job. So thank you for spending some of the time with us and not spending it being productive. That being said, we really do appreciate all your likes and comments down below. Please make sure you let us know in the feedback and help the algorithm out by, if you like this conversation, if you want us to do more of these, please let us know in the comments. Put your thoughts down. We'd love to hear how you're using Git. Are you using it in different places? What are your opinions around it? Where have you struggled at the beginning and how have you overcome them? That'd be super helpful for the community in general, just to hear more about that as well. That being said, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, idea, or topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question, And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation in all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.